Very good erev Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Now, this Shabbos is called Shabbos Nachamu, which means it's Shabbos of consolation. The game shows they was talking about consolation prizes. I don't know. But really, our consolation really is a prize. What's going on here? We just went through 3 weeks of mourning. We reached the crescendo, a zenith, with Tisha B'Av, of mourning, of sadness. And now all of a sudden, Shabbos Nachamu, everyone's rejoicing, everyone is so excited. Finally, we're free from, we can eat what we want, we can eat meat, we can sing, we can listen to music, we can do everything and dance, we can do everything. What's epis? What's the big Nachamu? Usually it's mourning, it's the other way. Usually the height of the crescendo comes first and it goes down lower and lower. And here it went, started low and higher, and then as you went to this depths, or you could, how are you saying, higher, lower, more strict mourning, as opposed to going from strict to less strict. Here it went from less strict to more strict to highest strictness, and then all of a sudden, rejoicing and joy, consolation. What's this about? I mentioned last week, there's a Zohar in Parshat Shmos. Talks about the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel was one of the prophets who went into exile after the first temple was destroyed, went to Babylonia, and he saw this tremendous vision of wheels and angels and chariots, different faces. It's quite an incredible vision that he had. Probably the most Kabalistic, mystical chapter in the whole Bible, openly so, first chapter of Ezekiel. Many people say you shouldn't even touch it, shouldn't learn it. It's too difficult, it's too mystical, it's beyond anything we can understand. So why did he say it? What was he doing? What was he revealing so much, putting it right in the Bible? For the whole world to see. The Zohar says that people were so depressed. In those days, religion and land were intertwined. There were the Samaritans, when King Sennacherib of Assyria took all the different nations and moved them around. And he brought the Kuthians to Samaria. And lions started attacking them. So they said, we must be offending the local god. Let's convert to the local religion. Not because they recognized the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, to the God of the whole universe, the only true God. They saw him as the local God. And so they left their religion that they had in Kuthia, came to Samaria, and they adopted the local religion as to not offend the local God. That's how they saw things. When you move to a new place, you assimilate to a new culture. They assumed the Jews went to Babylonia. That's it. It's going to be the end of our religion, the end of our people. We're gone. Now, the promise was they'd come back in 70 years, so they didn't believe it. They saw everything in front of them. Couldn't be. God must have abandoned them. Zohar says, can you imagine, they were sitting in the waters, the rivers of Babylon. They were enslaved, their hands tied behind their back, being tormented. The Zohar colorfully narrates that God was speaking to his angels in heaven, and he said, guys, what are you doing here? My beloved children are in exile in Babylonia. What are you doing up here in heaven? You got to go there to Babylonia to be with them. And you know what? I'm going to go with them. I'm going to go with you too. I'll be there. That's what it says in Isaiah. "L'manchem shlachti Bavela," for your sake was I sent to Babylon. That's what it says. And so in Ezekiel, he was going to the mikveh, in the river, and he saw this vision, and he's like, he went to all the people, he said, what are you so sad? What are you depressed? God is here with us. He has all his angels, all the chariots and everything. They're all here with us. I said, come on. You're pulling our leg. It can't be. And so he told them all the details, what he saw. And they said, oh, when they heard all the secrets, they said, oh, he's not making this up. And then the exile didn't seem so bad, because they knew God was with them, and God would not abandon them. This was just a test. This was just a correction. This was just a wake-up call to come back to God. But it didn't mean that God abandoned them. It was just the opposite. It says when the second temple was destroyed, they say that the cherubim that were on top of the Holy Ark, when God and the Jewish people, the relationship wasn't good, they had their backs back to back. When the relationship was very good, we're face to face. And when Titus came in by the destruction of the second temple, it wasn't just that they were face to face, they were embracing. Really at that point, God was closer to us than ever before. So that's the consolation prize. That we can continue our religion everywhere. When it says, Asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socha, make me a temple, I'll live within them. It doesn't mean live in the temple, it means soch kalech v'echad. In the heart of every Jew, or every human being who wants to come close to God. That through our religious life, it's not just a point to come to shul once a week and go home, do whatever we want. Whatever happens in shul, whatever happens, which is called a mikdash ma'at, a miniature temple, Ezekiel calls it, that we can have that experience. It's not just something we do and that's it. We have to bring something home. That's why we go home and we make kiddush, and we have shulchan asher lifnei Hashem. This is the table before the Lord. Another line from Ezekiel. That actually our table in our house comes, our sages say, to replace the altar that existed in the temple. We come in, we invite friends, we eat, we make blessings. Our home becomes a temple. Asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socham. And so that's the great consolation prize that we experience. That despite all the darkness of this exile, God is still with us. That's maybe greater in a way than having the temple. That every place can be holy, every moment can be holy, every person can be holy. It's not confined to just one building in Jerusalem. That spirit has now come with us wherever we go, as long as we remember it and take the message with us. And what is the message? This week's Parsha is so rich. It has the most important things in our religion. The Shema, the 10 Commandments are in this week's Parsha. And those might overshadow something else that to me is just so incredible. Generally in religion we talk about a thing called blind faith. When you look at Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 32, in other religions, they say don't ask questions, just accept with blind faith. That's not what our religion says. Moses, in his farewell address, which is the whole book of Deuteronomy, incredible words that he says. Verse 32, chapter 4, it's on page 672 in the Hertz Chumash here. He says, "For ask now of the days of past. He says, it's more than now doesn't just mean no, doesn't just mean now, it means please. It's almost like I'm daring you. Please ask questions. Learn history. The days which were before you, since the day that God created Adam, created human beings upon the earth. And from one end of the heaven to the other. Do research. Learn a little bit of comparative religion. That's what Moses is saying. Whether there's been such a thing as great as this thing is, or has ever been heard like it, was he talking about? The next verse it says that everything's in context. Did ever people hear the voice of God speaking out of the midst of the fire, as you have heard and lived? Or has God tried to go and take him a nation from the midst of another nation, by trials, by signs, and by wonders, and by war, and by a mighty hand and outstretched arm? We read this in the Haggadah. And by great terrors, according to all that the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before thine eyes. Wasn't Muhammad alone in a cave somewhere getting a message from Gabriel. It wasn't Joseph Smith in the woods getting a message from the angel Moroni. It wasn't even the disciples of Jesus up in an attic receiving some vision. Only a few people. Something totally different. Something totally unique in the annals of world religion. That an entire nation should hear the voice of God and live. No one else ever made up a story like that. No one else even tried to. Why? Because you can't make up a story like that. You can't get away with it. If I would tell you that in the middle of the Super Bowl, didn't you see that the flying saucer came down and had a message saying what they wanted? Of course not. Now, if someone said they were in the woods and they saw it, take it or leave it. Maybe yes, maybe no. And if it had some kind of message to change your life, would probably leave it and not take it. But if you say, well, it happened, the whole world saw it. It was in the middle of the Super Bowl. Well, if it didn't happen, you can't get away with it. And if it did happen, you know about it already. I wouldn't have to tell you. Same thing. You couldn't get away with making up a story like this. You want to say, Bible critics claim that in the time of Ezra, when the Second Temple was built, that all this was made up? Or maybe it was earlier by Josiah, by Yoshiyahu Melech, that they found the book of Deuteronomy. Couldn't get away with making up something like that. The people would never have accepted that. They would have known, they would have heard, even the level of apostasy that was in the time when Josiah became the king. There were still people left who remembered from their grandparents. They would have known. There's no way to make up this story. No one would believe it, especially the Jews. We're so skeptical, we're so hard to convince. How would you convince the whole Jewish people something like this happened if it didn't happen? It must have happened. That's why it says, you were shown to know, not to believe, but to know that the Lord is God and there's nothing else but Him. That message is nothing else but Him. On a side note, that Rabbi Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik, the Brisker Rav, the Holy Brisker Rav, when he was escaping with his family, escaping the Nazis, running to Jerusalem from Brisk in Lithuania, they came to a checkpoint. They were in some kind of a car that they were escaping, hiding. And he told his family that when they come to inspect the vehicle, just think of these words, Ein od movado. There's nothing but God. And nothing else but Him. There's only God, nothing else. Just think about that. With all your mind, don't think about anything else, and we'll be safe. They came to a checkpoint, and the guard at the checkpoint, he saw them, he said, there's Jews here, and he called over an officer, an SS officer. As he was walking over to get the officer, Rabbi Soloveitchik said, someone here is not concentrating enough. Think, Ein od movado, nothing else but God. And so they all did, and when the officer came back, they said, there's nobody here. They made themselves invisible by a miracle, because it's not something to do all the time, but at a time like that, when you need a miracle, it's there. Because there's nothing else but God. And really, all these things in the world are just here to test us, to see, do we really believe? Do we really know that there's nothing but God? And it's difficult. It's very difficult, especially, I can't imagine how to have that type of faith in that type of situation. And it's painful what we go through in our exile. There was a story, there was a Nazi beating up a Jew in the camps. And he said, how can you still believe you're the chosen people? And he answered back, he said, as long not the one who are beating the other ones, we're still the chosen people. As long as we're not beating you up, we're still the chosen people. And unfortunately this week, I don't want to get into politics, and it's not a political issue. This week there were some horrible events that took place in the Holy Land. I didn't even want to bring it up. It's just, there's no excuse for, I don't need to get into what happened. I just need to say there's no excuse ever for violence. Whether it's a Jew attacking another Jew, or it's a Jew attacking someone else, I don't mean in self-defense. I mean to stab someone because, alright, maybe they're doing something wrong. It doesn't give you a right to go stab them. That's much worse. Alright, you don't get along with your neighbors. They're a different religion, whatever. You don't go and bomb their house, kill a little baby. That's not the Jewish way. That's not the way of the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's not the way of our chosen people. And there are not enough words to condemn anyone who does it. Doesn't matter how long their beard and their payas is. They're not. That's not the Jewish way. You know, I don't want to get into mystical things that might sound crazy, but the Zohar says, you know, there's a group mentioned in the book of Exodus that have had a bad rap over the years. The erev. It says there was a mixed multitude that left with us when we left Egypt. Fact is, Rabbi Victor Miller said that really the erev was the greatest sanctification of God's name in history, because so many non-Jews converted to Judaism. It was maybe more than the actual born Jews who left Egypt, the mixed multitude that were with us when we stood at Sinai. The erev that gets the bad rap are not those human beings who sincerely joined our people and are actually part of our people. That's not when the Kabbalah, Kabalistic sources in the Vilna go and talk about the erev. They're not talking about those people. There's not a taint that comes just from being born not Jewish. Just the opposite. A convert is closer to God in many ways than the born Jew. So all this about the erev is really talking about a different group, according to the Zohar, because that's the ones who put. It's the Kabbalists who are always putting down the erev. I have to put that in context. It says that the erev are a negara, a bad blemish. And it says that stands for nephilim, kiborim, anunakkim, rephoim, amalekim. 5, what do you want to say, non-human, demonic, extra-dimensional, extraterrestrial, whatever they are, groups. I'm not saying necessarily that that's what we believe in Judaism, but I'm saying from the standpoint of the Kabbalists who speak about it in erev in a negative way, that's what they refer to. Whether it means literally or figuratively doesn't necessarily matter, but something that's different than a regular human being. And I would say that for whether it means literally or figuratively, for someone in our people to do such a thing as those 2 events that happened this week, that can only come from the erev. That can't come from our regular holy Jewish people to do such a thing. And we had a lot of problems in our people from these groups. And what we have to do is keep this message alive of what happened at Mount Sinai. Never to forget. Ata hareis ladas, we were shown to know that the Lord is God, there's nothing but Him. He wants us to live according to His commandments, which are summarized in the 10 Commandments. Really, any of the 613 commandments can be summarized by these 10 commandments that we have in the 5th chapter of Deuteronomy. How do we keep that message alive? Because it was so long ago. On one hand, it's true, there were more people at Mount Sinai than whoever met George Washington in his life. So if you believe George Washington was a real person, you have to believe Mount Sinai was a real event according to that type of logic. But on the other hand, it was so long ago. George Washington was only a little over 200 years ago. But Mount Sinai was 3,300 years ago. How do we know what happened? We discussed the Holocaust. Unfortunately, there are people who try to deny that it ever happened. So how would you keep that message alive? I remember a rabbi who I know, Rabbi Singer, he said, we could keep it alive. He just said theoretically, hypothetically, through things very similar to the mitzvahs that we do. To have these little reminders all the time. And so perhaps, right after the Ten Commandments, we have the Shema, to remind us of that we have these things. We say the Shema morning and night. We have the tefillin. We have the mezuzah. To keep that message alive, we have the tzitzis, which we read about in the book of Numbers, and we have again later in Deuteronomy again. To be little reminders of that which took place in Mount Sinai. That's what it really says. By the tzitzis, so you should remember all the commandments of the Lord your God. Tizkru, V'sisemus kol mitzvos Hashem. To remember all the commandments of God and to do them. And so that's how we keep this message alive. And that's something we don't need the temple for. We can do it in our homes. We can do it in the synagogue. We can do it anywhere. Some people do it, out in the street. They put tefillin on people. In Walmart, in the parking lot, or in ShopRite. Not necessarily what I would do, but you could. And it's not just you put this on. It's of course it's just because God said so, and we have to do it. But it's to keep that alive. It's something that's been going on for 3,300 years and we've been keeping alive. And to remind us really that there's nothing but God, and also to remind us, to constantly ask, to remind us what happened at Mount Sinai, an event that could not be mistaken, could not be made up. And in that way, then we see all the chariots, all the angels. We see God Himself is with us wherever we go, because His glory fills the whole world, no matter where we go. And in that way, we have that real consolation prize of Shabbos Nachamu. And there could be no greater joy than that. That despite all of our failings, even those people who did that, I'm not saying that that person himself, but something entered into him something possessed him that was not from holiness. Maybe in other things in their lives, they're good, holy Jews. And I'm not questioning them. It's not for me to judge. I'm no better than anybody else. But the point is that we have to keep this alive, keep the message alive. And despite our failings, and despite how poorly we live and mistakes we make, maybe mistakes I made are worse than these people, I don't know, could be. But still, despite that, God loves us, He's with us wherever we go. And that's the greatest Nachamu, that's the Nachamu Ami of Shabbos Nachamu. Good Shabbos. And let's see, we'll see that big Nachamu and we'll get the temple back.